Hey, I got the saw gear here set up on my Capex saw, and I want to walk through with you how I set this up and the things that I discovered when I started setting it up. I mean, this was a real learning experience, and I want to start right at the beginning. Before I even get into how the saw gear works, first thing I've got to do is explain what I learned about how a miter saw actually works. So look in here close and you'll see that I've got a line on this little piece of 1x4. A really fine line right here that I've drawn with my 2 5/10 pencil, so it's real sharp. I've got my laser right on it, so I'm going to make a butt cut right here. And now I'm going to swing the saw to the right and make a right hand miter. This would piece, if I were saving this piece, if this were my work piece, this would be the inside corner. Here's the long point. This would be the inside corner for a piece of baseboard. Now I'm going to swing the saw to the left, 45 degrees, and make another cut. Now this would be the outside corner for a piece of baseboard. If this were the piece we were saving, I'd be cutting the outside corner. Here's the long point. The short point would be at the back of the material. You notice I've got a clamp here. I've had this piece clamped to my fence for every single one of these cuts. Now let's look at these closely. If we measure this, the butt cut, right to the edge of the butt cut, measures 4 inches dead on. To the long point of the inside corner piece, if this were an inside corner, the measurement to the long point right here would measure 4 inches, just a hair shy. Right to this long point right here. Now let's measure to the outside corner. Here's the deeper cut I made. If I measured that, it's 4 1/16 of an inch. So it's really close. Now the point I'm trying to make here is that the saw pivots perfectly on a point, on a single point, that's flush with the face of the fence. The auxiliary fences that I always put on my miter saws, if you want to maintain that pivot point, you can't use the auxiliary fence. As soon as you put the auxiliary fence on the saw, it shifts that pivot point forward. Miter saws are engineered, and this is what I've just learned recently, miter saws are engineered so tightly, so precisely, that the blade actually needs to pivot on a single point on the saw. And this example right here shows you that that point is off by enough to cause a 1/16 of an inch difference in his cut. For the saw gear to work precisely, that point has to be dead on. The pivot point of that blade has to be dead on in the same spot for every cut that you make at your saw. So to fix this, to calibrate this saw, or rather to adjust this saw so that it cuts closer to that single point, I'm going to pull the fences off. And all I have to do to pull this fence off, the saw gear is really simple. I just have to slide this fence back, and I can take this side off now. There's plenty of room. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to loosen up the base of the fence itself. And I've got a pencil line that I drew right alongside that fence before I loosened it. A real sharp pencil line that I drew again with the 2 5/10 pencil, and I'm going to take this fence and just push it back. Now that it's loose, it doesn't give very much, just a little bit of movement. I'm going to push the fence back all the way, and now I can see that line. I'm actually seeing that I'm past that line on this end now. I'm just past it, and on this end, I will be in just a second. Let me loosen this up a little bit more, and this one too, I think. There we go. Now I can see that line. It's coming clear on the face of the saw, on the face of the fence. And I'll tighten all of these up. And then I'll make those cuts all over again. I'll pick a measurement that's easy. Right here. Let's go 7 inches this time. Take my square across there so it's nice and crisp. and set that right on the laser, and I'll clamp this down again the same way. I'll make the butt cut first. Swing to the left hand, to the right hand miter. A little bit deeper than the butt cut, and then come back to the left hand miter. And now look at the difference here. It's considerably different. I mean, it may not be considerable to some people, but to a finished guy who's trying to cut within a 32nd of an inch, it's considerable. Look right here, and you can see that the short point on this cut here is almost, it's within a 32nd of an inch of the long point on this cut here. So let's look at this with a tape measure again. And we're at 7 inches with the butt cut. 7 inches, a little bit strong. If we look at the long point, it's at 7 inches, just a tiny bit weak. And if we look at the short point from that outside corner, we're at 7 1/32 of an inch. So that's exactly how much the saw is off now. If I wanted to dial this in even closer, I could pull my fences off, remount the holes a little bit, and then push that fence back just a hair, and I'd probably be able to adjust it so that these cuts were perfectly lined up at the same pivot point. Now, that's the way you want your saw adjusted, at least ideally. Get it as close as possible if you want to use the saw gear to its full potential. Attaching the saw gear to my extension wing here was really easy. It didn't take a lot of extra hardware. There are just 2 brackets that I bolted down, one about here and one about here, just to the back of my extension wing. And then there's 2 knobs that you tighten up just to tighten the fence down to the extension wing. And I'm just going to adjust this so it's just back from flush with my wing, and then tighten these 2 up. And the computer itself, the instrument itself, actually just drops down with a shaft right into the fence, so it's really easy to set this up. Now I'm going to turn this on, and since I've slid it back and forth like this, I have to recalibrate it so that it'll know exactly how far it is from the fence here to the blade. The fence is pretty simple. I've just attached a wooden plate to the fence to make it easier for me to cut crown molding and stuff that's tall. But I'll show you that in just a second. So let me show you how I calibrated this just to for the distance to the blade. That's the first step. So the first step, once you've slid the fence itself back and forth, is to recalibrate the instrument, and it's really easy to do that. Just set a piece of wood in here, find out exactly how far it is from the fence to your cut, and with my laser I can see it's 17 3/16, and all I have to do is first push the calibrate button, which is this one right here, which says distance from the blade to the fence, and it's asking me for what the length of the piece is. It's 17 inches and 3/16, and just push start and it enters it. So that's the size of the piece. I'm going to double check. Yep, we're right at 17 3/16. And that's it. That's the first and the last thing I have to do. Now it's calibrated to cut just about anything I want. Okay, so let's say we're going to cut some baseboard here. On this end right here, just for now, let's say it's a typical piece, the most common piece you cut in a house, an inside corner to an inside corner. Take the long point on this inside corner and we butt it up against the fence here. And let's cut another inside corner. So it'll be an inside corner to an inside corner, and we'll cut one in this direction. And let's make this piece about 17 inches long. So I don't have to enter any angles here because I'm really cutting from the long point of this piece to the long point. Since it's pivoting on the same position right here, I don't have to enter in any angle. If the measurement's going to be the same whether I cut a butt cut, whether I cut an inside corner, or whether I cut an outside corner. So let's just enter a measurement here of like 18 inches and push start. I just have to push the piece up against the fence, make sure it's snug against the fence, and it goes. And the piece measures 18 inches right on the nose. Now let's look at another piece. I'm going to take this same piece. Oh, I'll cut another one. We've already got it. Look, we've got one cut here already for an outside corner. Here's where it gets just a little tricky. I'm going to make another cut so it's cleaner. Okay, so there's a clean clean outside corner cut with the short point at the back of the molding and the long point at the front. I'm going to take the long point now and I'm going to butt it up against the fence. And what we're really measuring to is the back of the molding. So we have to compensate for the length of the miter. To instruct the instrument to do that, we have to enter the width of the material, which is a 1/2 inch. So if you push the W button right up here, you'll see I've already got the material entered in here as a 1/2 inch. I'll just do that one more time. You push a 1/2 inch, and that's the width of the material. Just push start. And now we know what the width of the material is. Now let's enter in the length of the piece we want. Let's say we want to cut this 12 inches. I have to first push this angle button for an outside corner on the right side. So I'll push that button, and then I'll enter in 12 inches and push start, and we'll cut this piece. And the measurement of that piece, if I burn an inch right at the short point here, hold my tape there, measurement of that piece, oh look at that, it's a 1/16 of an inch too strong. Almost, not quite, about a 32nd. Well, we can fix that. All we have to do is recalibrate this tool, recalibrate the instrument right now and tell it that instead of really cutting 12 inches right here, it's cutting, let's check that again, instead of cutting 12 inches, it's really cutting 12 1/16. All I have to do then is press the calibrate button once, press this angle once, and tell it that that measurement was actually 12 inches and 1/16, and press start. And now the SawGear is calibrated even more precisely. Now let's cut some crown molding. I'm set up here to cut crown molding just like I always do. I use a gauge block up against the fence, and then I put a sacrificial crown stop up against that and clamp it to my extension wings. And what I want to show you here is, first of all, the gauge block is sized for the projection of the crown across the ceiling. And the base of the saw is the ceiling since the crown's upside down. So that positions my crown perfectly. So that's why my crown stop is set here. But let's look at this gauge block a little bit more for just a second here. If we take this gauge block and I make an outside corner cut on it, and remember it's the outside corners that we have to think about and be concerned about the most, because it's the outside corners where we have to add in the projection across the ceiling to the miter cut so that we get our measurements at the right point, at the short point, not the long point. So I'm going to go ahead and make a cut right here. And let's enter another number so we can check the accuracy of the setup. We'll push 20, but first I want to push the outside corner button with the long point against the fence, and then we'll push 20 inches. The fence will slide out automatically. So I'll put the long point against there, and we'll measure from that short point. And let's just make a cut here. And measuring from the short point, from right here, if I hook my tape on there, it's 20 inches, but let's get it really accurate, and I'll burn 1 inch. So if I burn an inch right from the short point, that's dead on, right at 20. Dead on. So what does that tell me? I mean, why am I spending the time on this piece of 1x2 that's actually doing 9/16 perfectly? Because it actually represents the crown molding itself. The crown molding is just going to project vertically up off of there, whatever the height of the crown is. But the cut on the crown and the measurement, the relationship and the ratio between the long point and the short point of this piece of 1x is going to be identical on the crown molding. So let's slip the crown molding in here now, and I'll show you what I mean. There's a piece of crown molding. It's got an outside corner cut on the right. That's the tough one, remember. Cleaned up that cut a little bit. If I slide this across here, now we're hitting the long point. I'm going to swing the saw back and just make a nick at the short point here, at the butt cut on this end here, and that should be 20 inches. And I can measure this piece from the short point, remember I'm burning an inch, so it should measure 21 inches, right on 21 inches to the back side of that butt cut. Now, that's what I've discovered is the real beauty of the SawGear. When you're cutting baseboard and crown molding, the only angle you'll be using will be the Z angle. When you cut casing, you'll be using the X angle up here for any cut where you have a butt cut against the fence and a miter at the saw. And you'll be using the Y angle whenever you have any cut this ahead, like has a miter on both sides of it. But baseboard and crown molding now are even easier than casing. It used to be kind of the other way around, but baseboard and crown molding, you don't even have to worry about the measurement mark for swinging the saw. On this piece of crown, I could cut this piece of crown with an inside corner at this corner, or I could cut this piece of crown with an outside corner at this end, if I hadn't made this butt cut first, and the measurement would be exactly the same. So the only thing you have to compensate for is whether or not you're cutting an outside corner on the right-hand end of the piece first, the end that butts against the fence. And of course, since this is crown, this would be a left-hand outside corner.